Hi, I'm Sabina Armbruster, and I am here today with Mike Knights. Mike, thank you very much for being here.
No, all good. This is fun.
So Mike, we've just had a conversation. You are an NDIS specialist disability developer. So you're a developer, and a lot of your investors invest in NDIS properties, or properties that are especially for NDIS providers, right? Tell me, you said that one of the biggest mistakes that they make is that they have really high expectations of properties specifically for NDIS. Why is that, and why is that a mistake? Is it not good to have high expectations?
Well, obviously, as an investor, you want to try and get the best return possible on whatever you buy, whether it be a duplex, a dual key, a co-living, or an SDA property. Well, the SDA market, a lot of the marketers and spruikers out there advertising enormous high returns and promising investors the world and saying that there's loads and loads of participants lined up to take the properties. In some cases, there's lots of participants in the areas, but the expectations of a buyer is based on what they've been told or read about on Facebook or through various platforms, or directly from sales agents or people who are just marketers, not directly the SDA provider like we are, is they think they're going to get it rented really quickly. And they think that the returns are going to be enormously high, 20 to 30, or in excess of 20% return. And that's not the case. In some cases, yes, we do get between 10 and 20% or higher, just particularly the guys that got in really early, or if you build something really unique and you can rent it out quickly if you've got more money to spend on that type of product. But it's really it's something that the government have full control over, and the participants' level of funding depends on the level of their disability. So a lot of the times the investors' expectations are very, very high. They expect to get the houses rented out really, really quickly, and they expect they're going to get 15 to 20% net return on their investment. So I like to bring them back to reality and say it's possible, but it's very, very difficult to get a property rented quickly at that type of return unless you're building the right location, the right type of design. You get lucky, and there's a massive demand in the area you go in, and even that still doesn't guarantee you're going to get your house rented for a really, really high return in a quick space of time. So that's one of the reasons why most investors have to be brought back to reality in this market, because in the NDIS, nothing moves quickly. In saying that, some of our properties have been rented really quickly for a massive return, but generally speaking, it's very, very difficult to guarantee anyone that your house is going to be rented on completion. It could take 1 month, it could take 12 months. Nobody really knows.
Can you explain SDA?
So the NDIS has got a scheme which is called Specialised Disability Accommodation, and that's where the government allow us to build properties, or allow investors, they call developers, to build properties that cater for a really significant high disabilities. And participants that have SDA in their funding means they get a plan of care, and they add into their care plan, which is Specialised Disability Accommodation, which is SDA. Now, there's only about 6% of all the participants in Australia that get specialised disability accommodation funding into their plan, which is a care plan. So they get their care covered for. That's cared by care providers. And as an SDA developer and investor, the government pays for disability funding, which is basically funding to accommodate the rebuild of the property to a certain extent over a 20-year period. So it's not actually classed as rent, it's funding to support the participant in the accommodation in the house or the room to support the value of the building over a 20-year period. So it's not rent, it's funding. But a lot of investors, a lot of spruikers call it rent. And it's kind of used like rent because it is funding on a per room basis. And that's what we specialise in, customising the build in locations of demand, customising a build based on what the participants and the families want. And there's 4 different levels of disability. You've got improved livability, fully accessible, robust, and high physical support. And they're the participants that have got the most severe disability in the market. Robust is a mental disability, and the other ones are very significant physical disabilities. And sometimes there's a combination of both, just to keep it simple. Yeah.
And you only do new developments, or because you mentioned the word rebuild, does that mean you do renovations as well?
We personally don't. We have done a couple of renovations. It's not cost effective, depending on the property, depending on the value. In some cases, you might do a small modification. You might do modifications to existing homes that we take over. That some of the participants may need some modifications done in an existing home that's a bit outdated, or they might have their disability might worsen over time, so they've got to do some changes to the house. But generally speaking, what we'll do is specialise in brand new ones. That's where the best funding is provided by the government. Although there are some other developers and other SDA providers that do modifications to existing homes, but it's not commonly done, not that cost effective. It's a bit of a specialised market that we're pretty busy doing what we do at the moment. So there's only one of me and a couple of guys helping me out, so we sort of do what we do.
So is that something we should be aware of as an investor? Like, is there a difference in return if we're investing in a new build versus a rebuild?
Yeah, there's a new build. A new SDA has a 20-year agreement, 20-year contract, which means that a new build lasts for 20 years. It goes up with CPI increase every year. If it's an existing build and they do a modification, the SDA funding is significantly different, and in some cases it doesn't provide the return that the investor will want, and it also might be a lot more expensive, because building an SDA property comes with lots of moving parts. You need like weight-bearing ceilings, and you need a super flat driveway. You need to redo your bathrooms. You've got to the electrics in the place significantly outweigh, in most cases, what it's worth. You need to basically do a bit of a rebuild, really. And you need a super flat block. So to get a high physical support home or a robust home, it's a major project. So in some cases, it might be cost effective for sometimes, but mostly it's more cost effective to build a new one in the right location, at the concept and the design that's in demand from participants in that area. That's one of the mistakes they make. They often build the wrong type of property in the wrong location based on the wrong information provided from a marketer or a spruiker, or the whole system in the NDIS is changing, the specifications change, then they've got to rebuild it or respec it up again until it's finished off. It could cost them a lot more on the end of the project. And in lots of the cases, the builder's choosing the wrong builder that hasn't done and completed many NDIS properties. It could be also pretty cost effective. Could cost you a fortune as well, because it hasn't been certified correctly. They get certified by an independent third-party assessor, and those SDA assessors are really, really on the ball. They don't miss a trick. The house has to be completed perfect before it gets the certificate of occupancy, and then it can be registered and enrolled on the NDIS portal.
And you take care of all that, right? All the certification, all the approvals, all that sort of thing?
Yeah, we oversee the works that the builder does. We insist that it's the builder's responsibility, the engineer, and all the professionals involved, that the house gets completed to the highest level spec, highest SDA specification, whether it's high physical support or robust, whichever it may be. So we kind of oversee and project manage the project from start to finish, from the design, the block selection, all the way through to the very end, and then we enroll the property, and then we manage the whole SDA enrollment. We find the participants, we network with all the providers, the support coordinators, and the stakeholders, sponsor all the expos to make sure we can find participants to fill the properties up. We pretty well do the whole lot for them. So if the builder doesn't complete the property correctly, we make the builder go back and fix it. We always oversee the whole project. We work on behalf of our investor to make sure it's spec'd up correctly, so it becomes a really livable property for the participants in the market.
As an investor, is there, like, how financial do we need to be for an NDIS property? Because obviously if we're an investor, we're financial, but you said earlier that there's a difference between investing in a just any property and an NDIS property. What do we need to be aware of? What are the differences there?
Yeah, like investing in the NDIS isn't for the faint-hearted. It's going to take you longer. Well, it used to take you longer in COVID. Particularly, it will probably still take you longer because of the approval process, the certification process. There's a fair few moving parts before you can even start the build. And then once the build's completed, you've still got to have it enrolled, and then you've got to wait for the participants' funding to be approved. So you've got to be financially fit. You have to be in a position to be able to carry the cost of the investment if you're borrowing the money until the property is rented and until the government releases the funding. Because the NDIS can hold up the funding for whatever reason. It's a slow system. So on average, it used to take 2 or 3 months, but now it could take 3 to 6 months before the funding is actually released if there's any issues within the plan. So for an investor's point of view, we always make sure you're conditionally approved. You talk to the bank. You need to go to a specialised bank lender that specialises in NDIS lending. And you need a minimum of 20, 30% deposit. And I've always recommended to my investors that they really need about 12 months worth of payments in advance offset in their loan account, just in case it takes longer to rent than a normal NDIS property. Or any other property, because you've got to carry those costs until the funding's released or until we find a participant. So you really need to understand that process won't happen overnight. It takes time. I'm giving you worst case scenarios. I mean, sometimes we get them rented reasonably quickly, but as soon as it goes to the enrollment stage and the participant placement stage, and then all the approvals and all the stakeholders have to agree, it could take 6 or 12 months before you see any SDA funding come through into your bank account. So making sure you've got good money back behind you and enough money in the account offset just in case it does take longer so it doesn't affect your cash flow. It's very, very important.
What does enrolment mean? So
we enroll a fully certified SDA property once it's got a certificate of occupancy. We enroll it on the NDIS portal, and that's when it becomes a registered NDIS property, and you're allowed to rent the property out to participants. It's basically, once you have the occupancy certificate, it gets registered and gets enrolled. It comes with a service agreement and a quote once the tenant's been approved, and that is the amount of funding that the government approve, which then allows us to draw the funds from the NDIS portal as a provider to distribute that SDA funding to the investor. There are a few other moving parts involved, but that kind of simplifies it. You can't do it yourself. You have to be an NDIS SDA provider before you can be approved to draw any funds from the NDIS portal.
So are we better off investing before the property is built or once it's on the portal?
Okay, so you can't enroll the property. So the property has to be built and certified before you can enroll it. Okay, and once it's enrolled, it stays within the system under that provider's governance, and then the property can be rented. It can't be rented, or you can't receive any SDA funding until the property's been enrolled, and the certificate's been approved, until the SDA quote's been approved and there's a service agreement attached. They won't release the funding. Okay, so some properties are completed and already rented. There are investors that are buying properties for premium prices with tenants in there, but there are also investors that are buying land and building, having it completed in 6 or 8 months, 12 months, and then having it enrolled. Whilst that's happening, we're looking for participants in the market, networking through all the different providers, expos, etc., marketing portals to try and find participants to fill the property up. There's also investors that will buy them on a single contract for their super funds, or they don't want to build, and they might want to buy one that's not rented yet, that is enrolled. Well, they buy it on the understanding it could take 3 to 6 months or longer to rent out. So what we do with those ones is we put casual tenants in, tenants that aren't within the NDIS system. That could be just normal families looking for rental. We put them on a 3-month lease, 3 month by 3 month, while we're looking for qualified SDA participants with funding. And we move the short-term tenants out, then we bring the SDA tenants in. That's on an enrolled property. So it means anybody can live in a property that's an SDA property. They look beautiful. The houses are magnificent. They do come with different facilities in there, but in the short term, until we get them rented to SDA participants, we can put casual tenancies in there as well.
Do you help people work out what type of investment is best for them? Because you've just talked through a couple of investment options. Do you help them work out which of those options is best for them?
Yeah, so we've come up with interesting, unique designs based on tenancy demand and based on a changing NDIS system. So our designs have changed and are continuing to change based on the demand. But once we meet with an investor and we give them the pros and the cons, we talk about what's good, what's not, what could go wrong. We fully disclose everything on a worst case scenario, and we find out if that investor's a good fit. Do they have the right temperament? Are they a nervous Nelly that's worried about the investing, or do they take, if they're not in a position to carry the costs and they get nervous, they're probably not the right fit for an NDIS investment. So we might introduce them to another positive cash flow investment. But we basically build our properties and design our properties on the demand based on the research that we've got by doing all the expos, all the marketing we do, all the research that's provided from various different platforms to ensure that there's enough demand in each location. And then we've come up with smaller, unique type properties based on that research. So, when the NDIS was first introduced, the government decided to promote large group homes. We decided really early in the days that we were going to do small duplex projects, villa homes, dual keys, smaller houses, with less bedrooms, but to cater for family and friends and guests, as well as an overnight carer's room, plus extend the pergolas at the back. They want lots of outside area to sit outside under a pergola, fully furnish them, media rooms and things like that. So we design to meet the market in that location depending on the demand. And that will be depending on how much money the investor's got to spend, what their risk folio is as far as, are they risk adverse? And, it really, we tailor make the product to meet all parties. It's got to be obviously specifically built to meet the NDIS specifications based on the demand, but also we've got to keep our investors' best interest in mind as well. So we're basically working for both parties, the investor and also the participant and their stakeholders. So we have a win-win situation for everybody. We also work with all the care providers and support coordinators. They've got to have a bit of insight in what type of property their participant might like as well. So sometimes we do a custom build for a participant, and we'll build it from scratch, and the investor will buy that with a ready-made tenant. And that'll be a custom build. It may cost more, but at least the investor knows that he's got a tenant or a participant to go in there on completion of that job. And that's how it's supposed to work. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked that way for lots of SDA providers around Australia. But in perfect terms, you'll have tenants lined up prior to moving in. If you know you've got participants in that location, and you can have care providers and support coordinators saying, I'll take the house out before it starts, that's building on demand is our preferred method. It works much better.
You sound like you've got a whole team around you, or a whole network of people that you can call on. And you mentioned banks specialising in NDIS lending. So can you help out with, where to go for that as well? And can you help out with the legals and, everything that goes with contracts and getting yourself ready for an investment?
Yeah, so we're well connected. So we've got independent businesses that all work for themselves, and we can just give them names and lists of different companies that are our preferred, preferred lawyers or preferred builders, town planners, SDA certifiers, engineers, draftees. We have all our guys are external independent contractors. And so we surround ourselves with the experts. They rely on my expertise as the type of design and the location. I give them all a briefing at what I want and where I want it, and then I ride them and make sure they get the job done as best as possible. And that's on behalf of the investor or for myself as a developer. So you've got to surround yourself with smarter people that are experts at what they do, and that helps us get the result we get. Particularly, the most important is to get those properties rented to high-profile support companies, and they refer us their participants, and make sure the participants and their families are happy. It's the support coordinator. Everyone sort of collaborates together. So we all try and work together as a team. And the ones that don't stack up, we don't move them. We move them on. We use people. The market's changing all the time, so we've got to keep adapting to meet the market and meet the SDA and NDIS conditions. Specifications change. We've got to be up there on the ball, making sure that the properties are going to work and get rented out for the best return, but also cater and provide the best facilities in each house as well. Yeah, so we've got them all on board. Happy to share them all. We give as much information out to every client we meet as possible. Yeah, with a whole network.
What happens if specifications or guidelines change during a development? Can that affect the investment or the return that we get? Let's say a government changes. How does all that work? Because, I mean, we're not just talking about a couple of months here. It could be longer than that. So can all of that affect our investment?
Absolutely. There's lots of things that have out of investors' control. Through COVID, there was in the NDIS legislation change, and they changed the spec a couple of times. So we had to basically pull the job up and then re-get it certified. And yes, a couple of occasions, it cost the investor a bit more money, but we had to do that on the basis that we wanted to make sure the property stayed compliant. Also, sometimes we might overspec it if we think the government are going to change the spec. They do give you a decent lead-up time with the intended specifications and intended changes that are going to be made. So we're pretty well on the ball when it comes to any legislation changes or specification changes. We're dealing with smart architects and draftees and certifiers regularly, and the government do provide the updated building terms and conditions and specifications early in the piece. So they got changed a couple of years ago. So we're pretty well trying to protect our investors as best we can. But some things are out of everyone's control. So we do also have a contingency within the contract to make sure the investor's protected in case something does go wrong that's out of everyone's control. Our investors always are fully protected, if that happens. So, there's things that we have no control over, and particularly with the government. But yeah, we always recommend that each investor's got a contingency, borrows a bit more than they need to. I educate the bankers I use, always make sure that's there as well. And the builders are aware of that too. So we don't want any hidden surprises as best we can.
Is there a guarantee at all along the way?
We personally don't guarantee. The reason being, no one can guarantee or force a participant to move into a property, and a participant's just like everybody else, but they've got disabilities and they've got a family, and they might change their mind. They can't, or they might be living with a flatmate and they don't get on anymore. Okay, or they could pass away. They might not be happy with the care service. They might get sick of living in that house, in that community. They could get sick and they're forced to move. So a rent guarantee in this particular market is very, very difficult. There are some companies that provide a rent guarantee, but it's a much, much lower amount. It's usually a bit less than one participant, and it means that the provider will pick up all the return on the second participant, so it's low risk for the provider. But it's also a much lesser return for the investor. It still comes with risk. If that provider can't guarantee or can't get a tenant in there, he's not going to be able to carry the cost if he's providing an investor with a guarantee. There's too many moving parts for any SDA provider to provide a rent guarantee in this current market, because it's people's lives at stake there. They can change their mind anytime. A tenant does sign what's called a service agreement, which is a lease agreement, but it's an NDIS written condition. It's all the NDIS conditions. And really, they might sign a 12-month or a 5-year agreement. Then they might die, or they might have an argument. They might, like I say, their situation might change. They can move out of that property. And there's a 2-month lease break, but you can't make someone stay. If there's a hardship issue, they're going to go, they can move. So the investor's got to understand that although we might put them on a 2 or 5-year lease, it doesn't mean they're going to stay. They're just like everybody else. If someone's renting a property and they decide they don't want to stay there anymore and they want to break the lease, they can break the lease. In some cases, they might be forced to pay the rent until the lease is relet. These properties are kind of the same. Unfortunately, they're just harder to re-rent than a normal residential property. But that's why the funding payments are so much higher, because it comes with lots of moving parts. That's the risk that the investor's got to take if they want to receive a 10 to 15% return on their investment or higher. So every investment has a risk, and they've got to be prepared to understand that. So anyone says that there's participants lined up and they're waiting at the doorstep, and they're ready to sign up agreements, that's not the case. It's unusually rare for that to happen. It does happen from time to time, but overall, generally, a participant can break any lease they want to, just like any other tenant can.
Does that mean you as an investor, you are investing in a property that has a higher yield, or that can potentially have a higher yield, but the trade-off or the risk, I guess, is that if it's not tenanted, then there's more of a loss. Is that the trade-off that we're talking about?
Yeah. So, look, if you spend $800,000 or $900,000 on an investment property and you borrowed 80% of that, your payments are considerably high. Okay, so you take the risk. Now, if you rent that property out for, say, $100,000 to $150,000, $180,000, your returns are much higher than normal as well. Okay, so the risk it's risk and reward. So if you pay a bit more money for this property that's been decked out with the idea you're going to get 100 to 200,000 return, which is possible, doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. You might get one tenant. Upside is if you get one tenant that's paying $60,000 or $70,000 in funding with their rent contribution, that's probably twice as much or 3 times more than what the normal rental is in that area anyway. Then if you get lucky and you get your second tenant or participant in there, well, then it turns into a really, real strong investment. But you can't guarantee they're going to stay there forever for a long time. Okay, so you're having houses or villas, duplexes with one tenant in each property is a much safer investment, because you're only got to find one participant per unit. And usually they want to live with a friend anyway. So we try and cater for those type of properties and come up with custom, unique designs to cater for more of a longevity, safer investment. You might get slightly less a return, but in the long run, you'll get a higher return because they stay in there. You're not going through, you're not churning through participants that don't get on very well in houses where there's 2 or 3 participants in them. So it's basically, it's hard to, you can't really guarantee anything in this particular space, because they're all got different issues, but compounded a lot more complexities compared with normal mum and dads or families who have to move from a normal rental property for whatever reason. They're sharing their flatmates, sharing, like, these are residential care facilities, okay? And they're sharing a house or a unit with other people with similar disabilities, mental and physical. So it's not an easy transaction for the care people, the care providers to look after. There's lots of moving parts. Yep.
What I love is that you talk about this is win-win for everyone. And I love that you do that. And you also, before we jumped on this interview, you said that your main focus is positive cash flow properties, that you don't believe in negative gearing. Talk me through that.
Yeah. So why would you buy an investment that you've got to pay for each week to get some tax benefits? So the idea, and my idea of investing, is to buy a property that pays for itself in a good location where there's lots of demand, that has got capital growth as well. Okay, where it means the property value will go up in value and the rents will go up in value. And that could be a duplex, it could be a dual key, it could be a co-living, it could be whatever. But positive cash flow if you build it properly and you buy in the right location, can change your life. If something happened in your life and you've got a positive cash flow property and you had to give up work for whatever reason, that property should stand alone and pay for itself. If you've got a negatively geared property and something happened in your life and you can't afford to keep that property, you're going to be forced to sell it, regardless of whether it might grow in value or not. The market might go down and it's worth less than you paid for it. So at least if the market does go down and you've got a positive cash flow property, you still have a positive cash flow producing an income compared to something that's negatively geared. Okay, so the NDIS is one property option that will give you a positive cash flow, once the property's been filled up correctly with the right type of participants in there, the yield on these properties can be magnificent. It can also be nothing if you buy the wrong property in the wrong location, or it takes longer to rent out. So that's the risk that you take when you buy an NDIS property. But once it's full, yes, and it's hard to fill, and it could take longer, and it could be frustrating, and you could be nervous waiting for it to be filled up. That's the challenge, but that's why the returns are so high, because you're taking a risk to get that really, really high return. Okay, so making sure you buy the right property, the right location with anticipation to make sure it's positive cash flow is my goal, and that's kind of what I specialize in. I was an investor many years ago with a large portfolio. My lifestyle changed dramatically. I'd land bank lots of investment properties, development sites, and I had a major change in life, and I couldn't afford to keep them. And from that date on, I said, why would anyone have anything that's negative geared? I was making a massive amount of money. I could carry the cost. Went from a really, really high income, massive business to change my life completely. I burned out. I had a negative geared portfolio. I never want to be in that position again. So that's why now I really promote positive cash flow, because no one can predict the future from one day to the next. So if you've got positive cash flow, you've got passive income, it means you can give up work and enjoy life with a good returning investment portfolio. And if they've got equity uplift, even better, and in a good location, and then the market is a long game, and over the time they'll increase in value as well. Real estate's a long game, but as long as it pays for itself, and if it pays for itself a lot more than a normal property, there'll be a lot of investors that will pay a lot more for it down the track as rents go up. And with government rents, CPI increases and rent contribution and all the NDIS funding that's out there, over the long term, they should increase significantly compared with a normal investment. Not saying we have a crystal ball, we can't guarantee anything, but based on the demand in the market for positive cash flow properties, my belief is that, why would you go negative when you can buy positive, and build positive, or build something at wholesale that's worth a lot more money at retail. Yeah, I don't want to go backwards like I did back in 2015. It was a tough gig. So, that's why I promote it, because I believe in it. I walk the talk, and I wouldn't invest in anything that's negative unless it was a short term and it had a development upside potential to on sell and build or develop. And that's where my positive will come from as well. So I share that knowledge pretty well share all that with all my clients. I share my story and reasons why and what I invest in. I'm all in this space in positive cash flow, would it be NDIS, duplexes, dual keys, small subdivisions, anything to do with development potential and equity uplift. I'll do my research and invest in it. And then whatever I bring to the table, or what I would build in myself, I would share with my clients, family, friends, and investors. Yeah. Passionately love that. Last thing I want to see is someone get caught investing in the wrong type of property in the wrong location, being sold something that just without doing any proper research on it. We need to prove to them that what we're going to give them is going to be the best investment for them at that time. If something went wrong in their life, will it stand alone, and will it continue to pay the mortgage? If they sold it, can they sell at a profit? They're the sort of things you want to go for. And will the market grow in time? Will this property increase in value more than the neighbour's one or one down the road? So they're the things I sort of practice and share and introduce to my clients and my team. Yeah,
there's amazing questions there, and I love the idea of a cash flow positive property that I don't have to work anymore. Love it.
Yeah, well, that's the idea. You want to work hard. Yeah. We don't live to work; we work to live, right? So if you've got your investments working for you, increasing in value and providing an income, despite whether the market goes up or down, or whether you give up work or get crook, you want to make sure that each house or each investment is treated like a business. If you've got a business that's costing you money going backwards, why would you want to keep in a business that's costing you money? If you've got a business that's making money, yes, you're going to pay some tax on it, but it's really hard to beat the tax man, right? So positive cash flows in the long run is going to be, it's the way to go. Whatever vehicle you use, whether it be NDIS, duplex, whatever it doesn't matter. There's so many different positive cash flow properties out there. That's what we really need to specialize in if we're in an investment. That's just my personal belief anyway. A lot of accountants and marketers and different people will promote different product, but that's just what I believe in personally.
Mm.
It's what's right for you at that time in the long run.
Mm.
Can
we overcomplicate investing? Let's say we're a new investor. Can we overcomplicate investing in property?
A lot of people can overcomplicate. I call it overthinking, and stinking overthinking stops you from making a decision, or you might overcomplicate it and then not make a decision at all. Keep it simple. Surround yourself with people who are already walking the talk doing it. Get yourself a mentor. Hang out with people that love property. Join property development groups. Don't get sucked into spending lots and lots of money on marketing courses, etc. Choose which one that suits you, but learn as much as you can. Talk to agents regularly, and keep it simple. Like investing in property isn't that hard. It's really common sense. A lot of times it comes with persistence and being in the market and being ready to pounce if the right one comes up, and just getting market knowledge on what you want to invest in. Doing your research is really, really important, but then taking action. Procrastination is not going to, it's going to stop you. So if you see something that's good, you've been pre-approved, you've got the money, or you've got the ability to get the money with money partners or friends or investors, and the banks are prepared to back you, and you see something that's going to work, take action and do it, because investing in property is a long game. But as long as you try and invest in the best one you possibly can in that location, do your research, and keep it super simple. It isn't that hard. Most of the times, the best investments are in your own backyard, looking right at you, and you missed it. And I call a lot of investors, I call it suburban snobbery, because they might have an area that they don't particularly like in their city or town. And they go, oh, I wouldn't live in there. I wouldn't buy over there. That's a terrible area. And then 3 years later, it booms, and they said, oh, geez, I should have bought in that location. That's because they're a suburban snob. I wouldn't live over there. I don't like the people that live there, or those houses are shitty or whatever. At least this way, you just got to look outside the box. There's so much opportunity in this market that you can't go wrong, really. If you take your time and do it right, then take action.
There's one other question that I've got, and that was, we've talked a lot about SDA, which is specialised disability accommodation. We haven't talked about SIL, which is supported independent living. What is the difference? How does it make a difference in the type of investment?
Okay, so let's just say there's 500 NDIS participants in Australia. There's only about 6 to 10% of participants that qualify for SDA funding. So that's where they add specialised disability accommodation funding to their care plan. The other 90% of participants may well be have had some type of care that's offered from the government to look after them. And within that 90%, there's lots of participants that are SIL. Now, they don't qualify for SDA funding, but they qualify for care. And lots of those SIL participants live in a house that's run by a SIL, which is a care provider. They call it a SIL house, all right, or a SIL provider. Now, that provider looks after the care and gets paid for the care. Those participants don't qualify for SDA funding, okay? So there's a big market for SIL properties for the investor to buy a property that's nice, low, so full bedroom bricky. And what we would do is sublet it to a care provider, and then those care providers could put 2 or 3 participants that qualify for SIL care in that house. And we can get a good return on those investments for our investors as well. And they're a lot easier to rent out, because there's a lot more SIL participants that qualify for that type of care, rather than SDA participants that have a significant disability. Okay, so the SIL houses are a normal home, or they could be a custom-built home to meet the requirements based on the demand that the SIL provider has. And that SIL provider will look after those participants who just qualify for care only, not for SDA funding. Okay, so that's a whole other market that's evolving at the moment, because rental availability is very, very hard to get. So we search out and we help buyers buy those properties. We'll rent them back. We'll rent them from the investor at a guaranteed rent, subject to us subletting it to a SIL provider who will then fill up those rooms and provide care to those participants. And they'll be SIL participants. Okay.
Got it. So, wow, we've certainly covered a lot of topics. We've talked about NDIS housing. We've talked about SDA. We've talked about SIL. We've talked about government funding and enrolment and NDIS specialised banks. And God, we've talked about high expectations, financial positions. We've talked about a whole heap of things. We've even talked about suburban snobbery, which I love. Mike, is there anything else? Is there something we've missed? Something you want to add? Something you want to leave us with?
I just want to reiterate, if you are entering into or are thinking about investing in the NDIS and looking at an SDA property, try and speak to an SDA provider, speak to an expert, speak to someone who was actually placing participants and looking after the management of each property for you before you buy from a marketer or someone you see on Facebook or someone that's not actually a qualified SDA provider. And if they are an SDA provider, ask them honestly how many vacant properties they've got in each location. Do your research on the provider you're working with or the agent you're working with. If you buy from an agent, you need to talk to the provider of their choice to get some type of understanding on how long it will take to get the property rented. What type of property should they build? Are they working closely with care providers that can actually give them some type of understanding on what they should build, where they should build it, and the design before you even start? Make sure you're spoken to the bank, get yourself conditionally approved, and then allow more money than what you need to put into an offset facility just in case it does take a bit longer to rent out. Be open-minded about the type of participants that you allow in the property, and be open-minded about sharing between an SDA participant and a SIL participant, because a lot of times SDA participants may come with a friend or a family member and they want to share the whole house together. Okay, so you have to be open-minded about that. Be prepared to rent out a 2-bedroom home, e.g. if you've built a 2-bedroom home that's got 2 rooms, 1 for each, 2 rooms for participants, 1 room for the carer. Allow another bedroom for family, friends, or guests. And if you can squeeze in a media room, so there's 2 separate areas, try and build something unique if you're going to build a 2-bedroom. Effectively, it means it's a 4-bedroom, but you've got 2 rentable rooms. And the 3rd room that's there for a family, friends, or guest, you can put a family member in there or a SIL tenant in there and rent that out between 10 and 20,000 or higher a year. Your SDA provider should be able to negotiate what's called a top-up fee from the care provider who's renting out the rooms to SIL participants who don't have SDA funding. They should be able to pay more. Okay, and just also ask your SDA provider if they can rent your property out to the normal market to provide you with cash flow prior to putting an SDA participant in there if they haven't got participants lined up and waiting on completion after you purchase the property. You can also make good equity by buying an existing pre-built property that's SDA certified and enrolled that hasn't got participants in them. And in some cases, they're much cheaper. In most cases, they're going to be much cheaper than a fully rented SDA property. So, for example, you might find a fully rented SDA property for, say, 1.2 million. You might be able to buy a completed one for 800 or 900 that's got no SDA tenants in there. Once that property gets rented, you can create equity uplift by selling it, by re-renting. But once it's rented, it's worth a lot more. So be open-minded as to what you look for. Some cases, it's much cheaper to buy an established house that's already SDA approved and enrolled than to build one. So we offer different varieties in the market. Also look at smaller complexes, dual keys and villa homes. It's better to have one participant that stays there a long time than have a house that's got vacant bedrooms in there that you can't rent out or has a churn of tenants that come and go. You spend a lot more money for that one. Oh, there's so much I could talk about, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But most importantly, reach out to someone that really knows what they're talking about, that's working in the trenches, that's been in the game. Try and buy directly from the source. That's really important if you're going to get caught up in the hype of the NDS. As I say, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's worth it in the end, but you got to be prepared to wait for it. It's not easy.
I guess what it comes down to is just inform yourself, do the research, and inform
Absolutely,
yourself.
do as much research as you can. But also, if you are ready and you're pre-approved and you think you're the right personality to buy an NDIS property, take action and buy it, because if you don't buy it, someone else is going to buy it. And yes, it might not be rented in a week or a month, but once it's rented, you're going to do very, very well out of it if you can carry the costs before it gets rented. And that's where you can make really good money in these properties.
Brilliant. Mike, thank you so very much for all the information, for your time. I've learned a lot. Around this video will be a link or a button that people can press to find out how to work with you, how to talk with you, and what the next step is that they can take with you. Thank you so very much for coming to this interview.
Thanks for having me. Hope I can help you out.
We'll see. Thank you.